Berkshire Local Planning Examination Hearing Session, and William Fieldhouse, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. I'm not going to go through all the opening statements that I made this morning and have made on other days. But this afternoon we're dealing with, just a reminder, if we could to switch your mobile phones and laptops to silent, which I think I've now done. And there's no fire alarm tests planned for this afternoon. So if the alarm does go off, we will need to evacuate the building through the emergency, following the green emergency exit doors, either that door or that door. Well, that appears to be rather blocked up by the camera, I'm noticing. But anyway, so we've got the non-strategic allocations in the AO and B to deal with this afternoon, along with a couple of other associated matters relating to that area. I've also got a few other things I just want to mention before we start that. So we've got until 5 o'clock if necessary. I suspect it won't take that long. The way I'll run it is, as I've done previous sessions, I will ask some questions to the council on each of the agenda items first, and then allow others to contribute on that if they wish to. If you do wish to speak at any point in time, if you could put your nameplate up on end, and when I ask you to speak, if you could turn your microphone on and make sure it's at the right height and pointing towards you, otherwise it won't pick up your voice. You can move the unit nearer to you if you need to. Okay, I'll just deal with some procedural things, then I'll go around the table if I could. I had a query this morning about the council's response to SQ 7.11 and the figure that had been attributed to North East Thatcham there for the 5-year supply from the 1st of April 2026. Could the council just clarify whether the figure of 480 was correct or whether it should be 320?
So the figure should be 320 is an error.
Right, so 320 as in the trajectory that was submitted in the previous schedule.
That's correct. But it doesn't change the conclusion of that 5.7 years. So it's just an error in the table. Okay,
so sorry, the bottom line figure, I don't know what it is, for the 5-year supply from that date.
Yeah.
Actually includes 320, not 480.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that keeps things relatively simple then, thankfully. Okay, fine, that clarifies that. Whilst we're on North East Thatcham, and I alluded to this morning, as you know, we've got some reserve days in the week, the 25th, 26th and 27th, is it? No, 26th, 27th, 28th. I think what I'll say now, to give people as much warning as possible, that the council's responses to action points 15 to 26, all of which relate to the North East Thatcham allocation, so that, and those action points, I assume, will lead to a modification to policy SP 17 and the reason justification, the site plan, and they also ask for 2 statements of common ground relating to secondary school provision and to the trajectory for the development of the site to be prepared and with the site promoters. So there's quite a lot of new information that will be available there. The deadline that I've asked that for is Wednesday, the 19th of June. Obviously, if it's available earlier, the better. But that is 1 week before Wednesday, the 26th of June, which is our first reserve day. So what I'm suggesting is that we put that in now as a definite hearing session on the 26th. We'll keep the other 2 days as potential reserve days, either for that or if anything else I decide is needed. So if when I see the response to those action points, if I think, well, maybe we'll need more than a day, I don't know, we could use the following day and take it from there. So I'll ask Ian to do an update to the examination website to make that clear that that's the current programme. Any queries about that from you or anyone else? No. Yeah, Carter Jonas, this might be something different.
It is something different.
Yeah, thank you. Ian's mentioned it, and apologies. I could have dealt with that this morning, which thank you for waiting. I'll deal with it in a minute. One sec. So that's that.
So, just
sorry. Yeah.
On a programme point, should we then register with Ian our intention to attend that day, or?
Yes, good point. I think what we'll do is when we do an update on the website today or tomorrow, I will ask for if you wish to attend. I think we'll work on the assumption that those participants that came to the Matter 4 session, which related to North East Thatcham, we assume that they'll probably want to attend, but you know, I'll invite expressions of interest, shall we say. Thank you. Nothing else on that. No, okay. On the, just for this afternoon, there was a document published this morning that's a statement of common ground relating to site RSA 22. So that's been available. I've got that, and we can talk about that when we get to that site. There's nothing you need to say about that now? No, okay, thank you. Right, which brings me finally on to Carter Jonas. So thank you for patiently sitting through this. I think I understand the point. Following the action point response to AP 14 and then AP 29, which set out reasons for why the council reassessed some of the HELAS sites as being suitable. The response to AP 29 summarised the reasons why others were not reassessed as being suitable. I think your interests are in two that related to the Newbury Thatcham area, which obviously weren't, I didn't therefore put them on the agenda for today. So if there's I don't want to talk about those particular sites, which I understand are THA 13 and THA 23, and they're in the gap between Thatcham and Newbury, I understand. So I've seen where they are on a map. You've provided some plans, which I've seen, and also I've seen them on the HELAR map, so I'm aware of where they are. But in terms of the general approach of the council's reassessment, do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for giving me the time to speak. And I apologise that it's a little bit out of order. Actually, it's in response to AP 29, as you say, which I think we might return to tomorrow, actually, and how that demonstrates the deliverability of sites. And that's really the general point that I'll try and make. I mean, they are kind of through the lens of an emission site, and I accept how that sits. But the first question, I suppose, is how our submissions have been considered, or how the Carter Jonas submissions have been considered. Because in AP 29, it says that there's nothing was received through Reg 19 and no update on availability and suitability has been given. Now, clearly, Carter Jonas responded at Reg 19, demonstrated, including the approach to how to manage the gap and DM2 and our written response on that. We didn't feel we needed to expand upon, so we didn't turn up on that. So, you know, but it's there as an approach. And that was one of the reasons why it wasn't considered deliverable. So I would have expected to see something to say why that wasn't acceptable. The same, actually, Mr. Balkin earlier raised the issue of a concern about transport being a reason for not considering a site, and I don't necessarily see that as being sufficient for an in principle objection. Trying to keep that as a general point. And then again, what we're going to move on to later on today about the AONB and the general strategy of sites in and out of the AONB, and that not being balanced against a landscape strategy. And our contention is that the site is immediately deliverable, whereas AP 29 suggests it's not deliverable within 15 years. So again, as I say, that's something for possibly tomorrow, but there's no reason, justification really as to why what we've said at Reg 19 and in written submission to the inquiry hasn't made its way into that response. Okay, well, in terms of the sort of the strategic approach of sites in the AONB and landscape assessment of those and landscape assessment of others and sort of comparison, well, I think we had that discussion really under the spatial strategy and the regional alternatives. And I think it wasn't, I think the council's basic position was that for various reasons, they felt some housing development in the ONB was needed, and they chose sites in the ONB that had the least impact on the ONB. It wasn't to sort of say, measure, you know, a relative balancing of landscape harm in the ONB versus sites elsewhere. So that's my understanding of the council position of that. So I don't really want to go over that again. In terms of the relative
merits of omission sites like THA 13 and 23 against the allocations in the plan. Well, again, I'm not necessarily going to get into an exercise of saying, well, could they have chosen different sites or would they have been just as good or better? Because the test for me is whether the sites they've chosen represent an appropriate strategy and whether those sites are justified. Separate to that, and I've said this on several occasions now, if I were to conclude that not enough sites were identified in the plan, I may ask the council to think about how that potential soundness issue could be addressed. And one of those may be about thinking about further sites. And so that's all fine. In terms of the deliverability and the 5-year supply, as at whatever date we're talking about, we'll deal with that tomorrow. And that obviously is about the supply identified in the site, in the plan, as opposed to alternatives. But again, the same proviso applies to that. So sorry, I'm kind of, I suppose what I'm saying is it's, there's no easy way to sort of, for me to say I can consider in detail the THA 13 and 23 anymore. I will ask the council just to clarify whether they did take account of, because I did ask them to take account of any evidence that had come forward after the original assessment through the HELAT and sustainability appraisal. And I said specifically including that submitted at Reg 19. So I think your question really is, well, it doesn't seem to refer to it for those 2 bits of land. So I will ask that I'll ask the council to.
Thank you. And actually, and in your question, it's not in front of me now, but there was something along the lines of HELA sites or smaller parts of HELA sites. And that's almost exactly what the promotional material that we submitted demonstrates, that there is a smaller alternative, not the whole of THA 13 and 23. So that's kind of part of that question, if that's okay. So I should forgot.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at the map that you provided. So there's one area, a larger area and a smaller area to the south of it. I don't know whether are they TH 23
No,
and 13?
we could ask what the difference is, but we don't need to do that. What it is without again trying to get into too much detail, is that the whole of the site is not developable. The idea is that the majority of the site, and actually Lower Henwick Farm is not, that remains the green gap, and hence the change in name to the site, and that it becomes land to the east of Waller Drive, because it's concentrated to that smaller area of the wider land parcel. Wider land parcel is considered to control the green gap, if you like. And sorry, that's getting into very close detail, but it's that kind of question of, don't think of it as the whole green gap. It's a smaller part of it, and that hasn't been reflected in the response.
I'll get the council to respond in a minute, but I looked at, I mean, the red line that you drew. So you're saying that actually the council should have assessed something within that red line that you drew?
Yes.
Right. Based on
the fact that the red line doesn't demonstrate the whole developable area. It demonstrates the area to be allocated where control for the green gap is maintained.
Yeah, understood.
And as development becomes a smaller part of it, and that isn't reflected in the. That's part of that same question of. Can we have more post?
Right. I mean, well, I'll let the council respond, but obviously, in assessing the sites that were put forward through the call for sites and through the HELA, you know, there's a big job the council had to do. Taking red lines provided by site promoters, I suppose, was a a reasonable way of starting off. Having to drill down below that for, which is I think what you're saying now they could have done, but you're saying that they could have done that at this point in time when I asked them to look at it in the context of the Reg 19 evidence that you put. Okay, understood. Right. Do you want to respond to that without getting? I mean, were you aware of the Reg 19 representation, and why is it not referred to in that response? Or is it not? I don't think it is referred to in the response to the AP 29. I mean, it maintains the reasons. It summarises the reasons.
It does. We did take it into account, but it doesn't change the conclusions that site is basically in a gap.
So the 3 reasons referred to, I think, landscape generally, settlement gap, which is slightly different, and highways, so 3.
That's right, yes.
So the council position is you still don't consider it, you're aware of that evidence, but you still don't consider it suitable for those reasons.
That's right, yes.
Okay, right, I think I'll take that as far as I can. Any final question or point that you wish to make?
Not without getting site specific. I think it would have been clearer if that document had said that the evidence didn't change the point. I think that.
Understood. I think that in the tables that you provided for the sites that you did deem to be suitable, now you did refer to the specific evidence that had been, you know, that had helped you to change your mind. If you know what I mean. In the cases where you maintained the same position, you took the view, well, you're aware of it and you took account of it, but the reasons still stand.
That's right, yes.
Okay. Right, thank you. You're very welcome to stay for the rest of the afternoon, but if you wish to leave, feel free to do so. I'll do.
Thank you very much. I think I might, but I will try and do it as quietly as possible.
I'll just give it, it's pause for a minute then if you want to just, if you want to do that, I'll just,
Okay.
okay, thank you. Okay, well, just before I turn to the sites individually, I just wanted to ask you, the council, a question about nutrient neutrality again, which we touched on earlier on. I can't remember, in week 1, I think. So 7 of the 10 allocations in this part of the district drain to the River Lambourne catchment, which is designated as being vulnerable. And hence the policy requirements for developers of each site to demonstrate nutrient neutrality through a project level HRA, and for mitigation to be in place and operational prior to the nutrient pollution being discharged. So in week 2, we discussed what that meant and the recent legislation that requires the council to assume that the relevant wastewater treatment works will be upgraded to meet specified nutrient removal standards by 1st of April 2030. And I think you said that they won't all drain to the same wastewater treatment works, but that each of them will have a technical upgrade made to phosphorus recovery facilities by the 1st of January 2025. That's so, even though they're different ones, that's the council's understanding of the position. Okay,
That's
fine.
correct, yeah.
Yeah. But notwithstanding that, your statement seems to indicate there will be further mitigation required to achieve neutrality, and that you've appointed consultants to provide evidence and guidance on the short, medium and longer term solutions, which you set out in a strategy for the River Lambourne catchment. So just explain why these programmed improvements to the treatment works aren't sufficient in themselves and this wider strategy is needed, and then what the implication of that is for the timing of development.
Can I ask my colleague Elise and Stuart to explain more about this?
Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you. Yes, as you've correctly explained, we do have several wastewater treatment plants within the River Lambourne catchment. There are do upgrades to the phosphorus removal rates by 2025. And although this will greatly improve the efficiency and removal of phosphorus, it won't completely eliminate it, which is why the additional mitigation will be required. We have, as you mentioned, commissioned a specific report on potential solutions for this additional mitigation, which is being finalised and almost ready for publication. And this will identify some of the solutions that we're anticipating will be the most relevant within the catchment. Examples including silt traps, riparian buffer strips, constructed wetlands, taking land out of agricultural use, cessation of fertiliser cover crops, and upgrades to existing private sewer systems. So we've also mentioned in our response to this that we've commissioned a bespoke nutrient calculator for the River Lambourne catchment, and we're expecting that this will also act because it's using more appropriate local assumptions than the standard nationwide Natural England calculator. this is also going to act to reduce the mitigation burden in the River Lambourne catchment. So we're expecting reductions in terms of the wastewater treatment plants and reductions in terms of the calculations. But nevertheless, a residual amount requiring mitigation, but we're not anticipating that to be significant after 2030, when the upgrades, after 2025 and 2030, when an additional upgrades will be undertaken. We're not expecting it to be, a significant requirement following those dates.
So my understanding therefore that 2025 upgrades will improve things and it will reduce the burden of mitigation on the developers of these sites, but they will still be required to do something by way of the sort of, I didn't actually pick up all the details, but were those things that they would be in the gift of a developer of these sites?
They will be in the gift of the developer if, for instance, they own land, if there's land within their control that they're able to use to develop these solutions. And also there is potential to provide a strategic solution out of these solutions, which we will be looking into as well.
Okay, so some of the sites, I mean, we can talk about this as necessary as we go through the sites, but they may need off-site works in some cases, I think you're saying, aren't you? So either in some cases, they may be in the same ownership and you can achieve it. Others, there may be a strategic approach, which may be that you get a financial contribution for doing something that a land's identified elsewhere or whatever. Is that but that's a process that would have to, could take some time, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, I think it's knowledge that several of the sites have been going through this process at the moment through the planning application stage. There are solutions that have been progressed on other sites that we've accepted. We've accepted, for instance, woodland planting on adjacent land and upgrades to package treatment plants within an estate's ownership. So solutions are being able to progress as they become available. For instance, the quantum of mitigation required following the upgrades to the treatment plant and following the reductions we're expecting as part of the calculations. The quantum of mitigation required post 2030 isn't expected to be significant. We've sort of estimated it in the order of upgrading around four package treatment plants within the whole catchment. So we're not anticipating a significant amount of mitigation being needed.
Okay, in terms of the 2030 and the legislation that came in earlier this year, doesn't that require the authority to assume that there won't be that neutrality will be achieved?
No, so we're
Right.
required to assume that the wastewater treatment plants will be operating at the technically achievable limits for phosphorus, which does not remove all of phosphorus.
Understood, right. So that there isn't an actual cut-off date there either for no mitigations needed after that from the developer. There still are things that will be required.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. So we can deal with the sites as we come through. I mean, what the council seem to be saying is you're confident that solutions can be found for each of these. The timing of that and how it might impact on when the development could take place, etc., is something we can talk through on a site-by-site basis. But at a strategic level, for the reasons you've clearly outlined there, you're confident that this is an achievable, that there are achievable solutions. Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, good. Any other points that people wish to make about that in the general before we come on to looking at individual sites? No. Right, so let's move to the first of them in the AONB, which is Lynch Lane, Lambourne. This is a allocation that's been carried forward from previous plan. It doesn't have permission. It is owned by a developer. Pre-application discussions have taken place. Is that correct? That's the latest. Yeah.
That's correct.
So you don't assume any completions in the 5 years up to 2028.
That's correct.
We can look at what the trajectory thereafter is. There's some detailed mods that were agreed with Thames Water and Historic England that relating to F and K, I think. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So on this one, the nutrient neutrality mitigation. So this is one, I think you've said that all of the relevant wastewater treatment works will have this upgrade by 2025, but there will be some additional mitigation. So in this one, what's the position with the likely mitigation over and above that that's programmed? Can anyone help me with that?
So with this site, we're looking at our current mitigation levels using the West Berkshire calculator. It's been developed by our consultants. We base this calculation on a number of assumptions, including site area. The wastewater treatment works is due to connect to soil type, rainfall, and the current land use. Currently, we're looking at they're connecting to the East Shefford water treatment works, which will be part of the tranche that will have upgrades assumed by 2025. There is land that's in the possession of the site promoter, which is adjacent to the site, so that could be utilised as part of the mitigation package.
Okay, so the combination of the upgrades and the land ownership, you're confident that a scheme could come forward
Yes.
without unduly holding up the timing of development? It's just something that could be normally sorted out through the normal development management negotiations. Okay. Okay, yes, Lambourne Neighbourhood Land Steering Group. I know you raised some issues here about that and also about some other issues about flood risk archaeology. Do you want to, well,
Yes.
on nutrient neutrality first, do you want to just?
Yes, this is a particularly sensitive site since it's adjacent to the River Lambourne SSI and SAC. And our view is that a larger buffer zone than proposed would be sensible. The area is also subject to moderate flood risk of groundwater flooding, and that makes another reason for a buffer zone. And so the neighbourhood plan group would strongly favour a re-examination of this site rather than a rollover, since it was approved before nutrient neutrality requirements came into place, and would strongly favour a smaller development of around 30 houses, which we believe could fit in with the existing road pattern and be in line with the general community view of sites of about 30 houses. We believe that one of the concerns we have is that we understand that the site controller has aspirations for an even larger development, which would be totally inappropriate for this site. And that's one of the reasons why it hasn't come forward for development in the last 7 years. So, and finally, we believe that from the call for sites we've made within the HELA structure, we believe we could reallocate the balance requirement successfully, meeting the community's aspirations.
Okay, in terms of the buffers that you're referring to, this policy requires a 15-metre buffer from flood zone 2
Yeah.
and 38 metres from the
Yes.
the SSI
Yeah.
SAC boundary. So that is on is that along the northeast boundary of the site?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because the Lambourne is
Yes,
there.
yes.
So you're saying that those, I don't know where those buffers are measured from, but presumably the council does. But what you're saying is that a larger part of the site.
This is a particularly sensitive site. This is the source of the River Lambourne, there are very few Winterbourne chalk streams in the world, and this is one of them. And it's been inadequately considered for many, many years. And we believe that getting this right is critical. And we're not seeking to overturn this examination. What we're asking for is it not to be rolled over, but to be re-examined.
But for what reason do you say that those figures that I've just quoted in the policy have not been worked out and are not appropriate? Why do you say the greater buffers?
Certainly, our planning consultant has advised that a larger buffer zone would be highly desirable,
Okay.
given equivalent sites elsewhere. I could give that evidence if required.
Oh, okay.
I haven't with me today.
Okay, in terms of the red line of this site, which is an interesting shape, it presumably follows something. I'm looking at the northeast boundary.
So it follows the buffer.
It's what?
The buffer, the 38-meter buffer to the SSI and SAC. And Futton 2.
Right. So that red line is 38 meters from the edge of the
River.
SSI.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and the Futton 2.
So when the policy talks about returning the retention of existing riverside vegetation, provision of a significant buffer between the woodland and the River Lambourne, minimum buffer of 838 meters, maximum 88 meters. What does that mean in terms of where houses could be built up to the red line or not?
That's correct, up to the red line.
What's this reference to max 88 M in brackets at the end of here?
We believe that that line was developed before nutrient neutrality and needs to be re-examined.
Our understanding is a range of buffer required.
So if it's up to 88 meters, 38, that would take you halfway across the site, presumably another 50 meters. Which is, I think, what it, yeah, okay, yeah, actually, I'll ask you to speak when I, yeah. Just turn your mic off for a minute, is that
It's
okay?
exactly what we want.
No, okay. Okay, well. Yeah, okay.
Can we,
But
like,
you've worked
go
out
back?
so you've worked out the capacity of 60 based on this red line and the approach that you talked about previously about the method, the density assumptions and the 75% developable and those sort of things, but assuming development can go up to the red line.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Right, I think I'll just have a think about that and what you could, just put a marker down that what this 88 meters means. In terms of, I mean, there may be a number of reasons why there's a buffer, to do with flooding, to do with nutrient neutrality, pollution to the river, and landscape protection, I guess. What are those figures based on? And does nutrient neutrality have any implication for the size of the buffer?
So, yeah.
Is it essentially a visual appearance, a landscape issue?
Nutrient neutrality didn't come into that one. I think it was landscape and in ecological buffer.
Nutrient neutrality didn't come into the buffer? No, that's
Exactly.
right. Okay, well, okay, thank you. Right, anything else from the Lambourne steering?
That's exactly the point we're making, that line was created before nutrient neutrality some 7 years ago. And we believe it needs to be re-examined in the light of the fact it's an SAC and an SSI. And we will prefer a bigger buffer zone, and we're prepared to reallocate elsewhere if necessary.
Okay, yeah, understood. Sorry, going back to what you said earlier about there being other land in the ownership, potentially providing some further woodland planting, etc. Are you talking about land that is between the red line and the river, or is you talking elsewhere?
We think we believe it's the field to the northwest.
Where the blue access walk and cycle links indicate.
Yes, that's correct.
In terms of with this sort of mitigation through woodland planting, does it matter where that is precisely?
It wouldn't, no, not necessarily. Although soil characteristics might have something to play, because more impeded drained soils will mitigate more, and therefore it would make it more efficient. But for instance, in terms of overall nutrient neutrality, it wouldn't even have to, if it was a strategic solution, it wouldn't even have to be on the site. But if it was on the site, there may be areas where it may be more efficient. Yeah.
But in terms of the proximity of houses to the river from a nutrient neutrality point of view, at 30, there's nothing problematic from your point of view about the 38-metre.
No, not necessarily. I mean, SUDs will become, be designed into the development, and presumably they will be designed where they're best utilised. So I don't, like Paula said, I don't think the 38 metres was done with nutrient neutrality in mind.
No, and it didn't need to be.
No.
No,
Yeah.
which is a different point from what the steering group was saying.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, it doesn't change things from that in terms of the layout and the development from that point of view. It's to do with other mitigations elsewhere.
Yes.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Okay, I think, and well, anything else you want to say about this site or anyone else about this site in terms of you did raise archaeology in your statement or your rep. Is there anything you want to say about that? I mean, there's a normal process that is gone through. Are you suggesting that it could be actually a constraint on the layout and amount of development?
Mesolithic finds have been found in that adjacent area, and so I think it would. And the earthworks have also been discovered. Lambourne is a very specific area for has a history going back 6,000 years, so it would need very sensitive treatment.
The process set out in its policy is the archaeology investigation. And
yes, of course.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, anything else on this site before we move on? No, thank you. Right, so next one is RSA 15, which is Newbury Road, Lambourne, 5 dwellings. This is another retained allocation. There was a permission for 8, but there's a revised application for 5. Okay.
That's correct.
So that's development assumed to be completed by 2028.
Yes.
Yeah. This, presumably the mitigation for this one has been sorted, the nutrient neutrality mitigation is sorted out, given
Yeah,
that
my
permission's been
understanding
granted.
is like in discussion, and then mitigation measures has been identified.
Yeah, in this case, we understand that the wider estate has mitigation options in terms of converting land use or one of their old septic tanks being upgraded. It's a solution we've accepted for the estate on different matters as well.
Are those subject to planning conditions then?
Sorry, what?
There's a planning permission for this development.
I believe that planning permission was approved prior to nutrient neutrality.
Oh, okay. So these wider mitigations are not part of the permission, they're things that are part of the.
Sorry, the wider estate has mitigation options.
Yeah.
I don't think that at this particular moment a specific option has been put together, but we understand that there is, for instance, old septic tanks on the estate that that are able to be upgraded, that would provide suitable mitigation for this, or indeed converting some type of land use to a less intensive use would also provide suitable mitigation. So in terms of the wider estate, we're confident that there will be a mitigation solution.
Yes, I understand, but I don't see how that's linked to the planning permission. Either it is, or is it linked to the planning permission, or is it not?
The planning permission hasn't put forward a mitigation solution yet, I don't think.
But it's, so one is required by a condition.
It will be required before the permission is approved.
Right. But it has been approved, isn't it? Or is this a revised application?
So I think that's two, so it's one permission on site for egg dwelling.
Yeah. So that
But-
could be implemented if it hasn't expired.
Yes, but like at the same time, it has been a live application for 5 dwellings, and then Elise is talking about that 5
Okay,
dwelling
understood.
application.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it. Okay, sorry about that. Right. Okay, and nothing else on that one, unless anyone else, is there anything from your point of view on this side?
We're confident that neutrality can be met from the wider estate. We have no objection to this. We're
Right.
much more concerned about this, the previous one.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. This brings us on to RSA 16, 20 dwellings at Bradfield South End. A new allocation without permission, single ownership. Not assumed to deliver by 2028, but 20 in the plan period.
correct.
This isn't one that has neutrality mitigation, is it? No.
No,
Okay. Right, any points, questions anyone has about that one? I don't have any more. No. RSA 17, which is Cheveley Glebe, 15 dwellings. It's a new allocation without permission. Again, nothing assumed by 2028, 15 capacity.
correct.
Some modifications agreed with Historic England. Look at the details. Yeah, this is one where I think there's a few of these. You've suggested an additional requirement relating to climate change in the modifications, which basically refers to one of the SP policies, I think. Scheme will be supported by flood risk assessment. That will include consideration of surface water flooding and revise any appropriate mitigation. So the reason you're saying that's needed is to ensure consistency across the policies. Does that mean that every policy's got that requirement in, or only certain policies have it in because they are known to have flood risk issues that need sorting out?
Yeah,
I think every policy has it in.
Right, which begs the question, if it's just a generic thing that applies to everyone, is it not covered by the SP policy? But either it's in all or it's in none of them, but you didn't want to be halfway between the two, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we were trying to be consistent,
Yeah,
and as more had it in than out.
okay, fair enough. Right, okay. This, again, has a neutrality mitigation. Anything you want to say about what that may entail on this one?
So for this site, it's connecting to one of the wastewater treatment works that is part of that 2025 upgrade tranche. The promoters are also in possession of the field that's adjacent behind the allocated site. So there's opportunities for mitigation to take place with that land.
Okay, so you're confident that a scheme could be delivered by the developer to, okay, fine, thank you. Right, so this is the one where there's a new requirement to consider potential for development to include a burial ground at the western end of the site. Adjoining the boundary of the Grade 2 listed old house further consideration will be required at the planning application stage. So, curious requirement to consider something. How would this work? And would it affect, would it affect the 15 dwellings for a start? And this is something that the parish council, I think, have supportive of.
That's right. Yes, this has come very much from the local community.
Mm.
So the parish council were very keen to see if we could include a burial ground as part of the proposals. We think that that is achievable even with the 15 dwellings on the site. But I think the extent of the burial ground, from my understanding, would be for how long you would want the burial ground to last for, whether it be 50 years or 100 years, as to the size. But as Stuart has alluded to, the diocese own the land to the rear, so there is potential to include further land. But we think that that would have to be investigated as part of the planning application.
So the burial ground can actually be outside the red line, you mean?
Depending on the size
Yeah.
that the community wanted, you could include, I believe, a burial ground to last for 50 years, actually on the site itself. But if the community decided that they wanted to include a larger site, then there would be potential for the land at the rear.
And irrespective of whether a burial ground is provided at the west end of the site, there is a requirement anyway for that part of the site to take account of the conservation area and the listed building. So in some respects, it wouldn't make that much difference in landscaping terms, whether it's a burial ground or whether it's planting and whatever else.
No, that's right.
Yeah, understood. But that's why that part of the site is suitable for that as an open buffer between the houses and the listed building. Okay, understood. Right. In terms of the requirement for, there's no blue footpath cycle lines shown on the map here, but there's a new requirement relating to a footpath link to the recreation ground from the western end of the site. So does that mean the layout should simply allow for a pedestrian route out of the site, either through this burial ground or whatever, and that's it? Or is it talking about a link to the recreation ground, you know, on other people's land off the red line, outside the red line?
So again, it would basically be through the same land ownership. So my understanding is that the parish council has been in discussions with the diocese, and that actually there's a possibility for a footpath to extend from the site, from East Lane, basically up to the recreation ground.
Where's the
The recreation ground is actually off the indicative site map, but it's basically up here.
up to the north?
Yes.
So when it says from the western end of the site, it means going up north.
Yes. So essentially, like from there upwards.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So it's from the western end,
Yes.
but it's heading in a northerly direction. Yeah. Okay. Well, I suppose those who know the place better than me would understand it better than me. So that's fine. Understood. So it would be the layout of the development on the site, but it also potentially would be through land, but on adjoining land, to provide that link, which I can see would make sense. Right. In terms of the frontage hedgerows, described as an ancient banked hedge, there's a new requirement. The requirement relating to access. So the access will need to be obtained from East Lane. To achieve the sight lines 2.4 by 43, accesses may need to serve more than one dwelling. At the moment, the indicative site map has got 5 access points shown. The modification says the existing hedgerow fronting East Lane should be retained and enhanced as much as possible as part of the design. So the provision of 5 access points with these sight lines, could that retain the hedgerow? Or would it actually only be achievable if you provided less than 5, fewer than 5?
I think obviously the less sort of accesses you have, obviously more of the hedgerow will be retained. But we think that that will be done by through the planning application process.
But the 5 arrows, is it sensible to show those? Given
We can have a look at that.
I mean, I can see that in some instances it's helpful to give an indicative access point. In some instances, it may be unhelpful if actually there appears to be a conflict between doing that and some requirement in the modified requirement. Obviously acknowledges the importance of this ancient hedgerow, described as this banked hedge. So presumably providing, I mean, you're tying yourself to these sightlines as well by putting them in the policy. I mean, is there not necessarily potentially a balance to be struck at the application stage between achieving sightlines and protecting the hedgerow?
Yeah, we can have a look at that as well.
Okay. Don't know if the highway colleague has got any concerns about this or well, sorry, it doesn't matter now. I think it's one that I may just leave you to. Okay, fine. So on this point about the access points and the requirement for a specific 43-metre sightline and the retention of the banked hedgerow, from the highway safety point of view, do you want to just give me an initial view?
Sir, 43-metre sightlines are based on 30-mile-per-hour speeds, so it might be possible that vehicle speeds may be less. Perhaps any planning application would include a speed survey, which may give us a bit more leniency on how much sightlines are required. Otherwise, as a highway officer, I'd be looking for the sightlines to be provided. Although I do take your point that while 5 axes have been shown, as a highway authority, we could allow private drives to serve up to 6 dwellings. So you could have less accesses that would serve a cluster of houses along that frontage there.
Irrespective of whether it's a private drive or an adopted road, the sight line, the 43 metres is necessary for a 30-mile-per-hour speed for safety reasons.
Yes, safety reasons.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll leave it. I'll thank you. That's helpful. And I think I'll do an action point to just have a think about that in liaison with the highways colleagues about, you know, how prescriptive the plan needs to be versus providing that sort of more detailed assessment at the application stage for the reasons, both in terms of looking at what the speeds may actually be, in terms of where access points may best be positioned to achieve maximum visibility, but to minimise the impact on the hedgerow and the embankment.
I think much depends on the planning application, and obviously we work with tree colleagues on this and other officers to achieve a balance.
Yeah, a balance. Chieveley Parish Council.
Thank you. We have set out in the regulation 19 response that we submitted that the requirement that we've established, so thus far, the work we've done thus far on the burial ground is a little over 0.2 hectares. The allocation area is about 1.1 hectares. So we think that there's still a reasonable prospect of a good design and still allowing 15 dwellings on this site and the burial ground. But as was alluded to earlier, if that's not possible, there may be other land available for to extend the burial ground into. So we think that's achievable. There are obviously some detailed design issues to resolve, which we did draw attention to, and including the transport access, which is remains to be resolved, and the retention of the hedgerow. But we think that most of those should be possible with a quality application and a quality design to achieve that and still provide 15 dwellings on this site. I think the wording on the proposed modification to retain as much as possible the existing hedgerow and enhance it, I think that's reasonable. because I think what we need, we do need a good design for the site overall. We haven't had proper assessment of the ecological value of the hedgerow itself, or indeed the whole site will, of course, need a BNG assessment anyway. So I think that's achievable, and I think that most of the modifications that have been proposed are justifiable and do overcome the issues that we raised in the Regulation 19 representation. And if we understand that the landowner has actually now appointed a team and is starting to develop a scheme for this and to bring it forward, and they've engaged with the community, so we're fairly optimistic that a reasonable scheme can be forthcoming, which will deliver the 15 sites, the burial ground, decent access, and good quality design. And as I said, the modifications proposed by the council do appear to cover most of the issues that have been raised, and other policies in the plan should cover what we're looking for in terms of quality of design if followed properly.
Thank you, that's very helpful. In terms of the hedgerow, you referred to ecology and biodiversity, but presumably it's got a visual quality that enhances the area that, to be retained for that reason
Yes.
is important as well.
Yes, it does have some visual quality, and it would probably be a design feature that is worth retaining as far as possible.
Okay.
But from a purely visual point of view, it may not be that the hedgerow, well, in my own personal view, the hedgerow is retaining it. If the hedgerow causes compromises in other aspects of the quality of the design, then what the balance has to be struck.
Okay.
And obviously access being one of them. Our understanding always of the 5 arrows shown on the plan was quite indicative, but somebody does need to do a decent piece of work on how this site should be properly accessed.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. Right, anything else on this allocation? No, right.
Sorry, I should just add there are other access issues which are of concern, because there's quite a big parking issue down there as well. So there are a number of traffic issues to be resolved down here. The parking issues relates to there's a very busy local doctor's surgery and pharmacy just opposite the site. So there are some traffic issues down there, but again, a piece of work needs to be done to resolve how those are treated. And also that there are some limitations on sight lines from both ends of East Lane, both getting onto the Oxford Road and getting onto the High Street. But again, that's nothing that a decent piece of work can't resolve in bringing forward a quality application, which we're hoping will be forthcoming.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, let's move on then to the next one, which is in Compton. This is the Homes England site, the Pirbright Institute, another retained allocation, subject to an adopted SPD and an outline planning permission for 116, subject to 106. So demolition and site remediation works are underway, and work to secure a development partner due to start soon.
That's correct.
Okay. 5-year supply contribution from 2023. I think.
We checking.
No completions assumed by 31st of March 2028. So notwithstanding the fact that demolition, is that right?
Yeah, because it's only outline permission. So at that time, the assessment is not deliverable within the 5-year period.
Okay. Yeah, okay. The site map has got some designations at the southern end, which is flood risk and local green space designation in the Compton neighbourhood plan. So that local green space, that it's already there. Sorry, that's been designated in a main neighbourhood plan, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And the flood risk area that would not need to be developed on to accommodate the 106, 140, how many is it? Losing track. 140, sorry.
Yes.
So that's shown there is for the indicative purposes.
Yeah.
For the layout, okay. Right, any points, queries people have about this one? No, thank you. Spring Meadow, RSA 19, Spring Meadows, Great Shefford, 15 dwellings, a new allocation without permission. No contribution to the 5-year supply assumed.
Correct.
This is a nutrient neutrality one. Do you want to just quickly update me on that then?
Yes, we believe this one is achievable through a number of mitigation options.
So again, this is one that there's an upgrade to the relevant works by 2025.
Yes, that is correct.
But and then some further mitigation would be
Further mitigation through potentially taking out adjacent agricultural farmland out of production.
is that in the same ownership then?
Yes, that is in the same ownership.
Okay, thank you. And again, this is one where there was an additional requirement relating to the flood risk assessment for the same reasons as you talked about earlier. Okay, anything else on that one? All right. Which brings us on to RSA 22. Well, sorry, it doesn't, does it? It brings us on to RSA 20, but it brings us on to these 3 sites that join each other in Hermitage, RSA 20, 21 and 22. So we've got a statement of common ground for, well, relating, I suppose, to RSA 22, but it has implications for the other 2 as well, I think.
Yeah, I think the walking and cycle.
Sorry?
So you ask your question again.
Well, sorry, the basic point, there's 3 separate allocations here, presumably because there's 3 different ownerships. Is that why they're 3 separate allocations?
So the 2, like the RSA 20 and 21 is the retained allocations. And 22 is the new allocations.
Okay,
Yeah, but ownership, I think 20 and 21 is separate ownership, but my understanding is maybe like 21 and 22 will have the same ownership.
okay. So the reason they're 3 different allocations rather than 1 is because for historic reasons that 2 were carried forward as retained.
Yeah, so
If I may.
Let me just finish with the council. That's
yeah, because it's allocated in the HSA DPD for 2021, and then now the healer size we assessed in RSA 22, this developable, like deliverable, so that's kind of 3 allocations now.
okay, but I mean, it could have been 1 allocation, could they? I mean, or can they all be developed independently?
I think the site, they are developed independently.
Okay. Right. Let me just deal with the nutrient neutrality upgrades. This will apply to all of them, I assume. So can we just deal with that, and then I'll come on to the layout issues. Yep, so I'm looking down the table here.
Yes, which site would you like to do first?
the solution's not the same, they're all.
Well, we've assessed them independently.
Okay.
I hadn't appreciated that we might be needing to combine the.
No, that's
assessments,
fine.
but,
In terms of the sewage treatment works.
Yeah.
The
They're all
same,
connecting to Cheveley, yes. So they would have the reductions by one tranche of reductions by 25, followed by the remaining tranche by 2030. The soil conditions at the site are favourable in terms of nutrient mitigation. They're slow draining, it's impeded drainage. So and because of the current land use on site, for instance, taking into account the sewage treatment plant upgrades and the updated calculator once it's in operation, for instance, RSA 2022, we're not anticipating a mitigation burden following 2030. In fact, a reduction in phosphorus. So it may be that if those sites are if it's in the same ownership as another site, it can essentially provide its own credits. Yeah. And I understand RSA 20 is currently, it has a current planning application, or a discharge of conditions, I should say. And we are having discussed with the applicant where we understand that they're pursuing their own off-site mitigation.
okay, thank you. Right, in terms of the statement of common ground that you've produced for RSA 22, let's just talk through that in terms of what that shows, and more, well, does it require any changes to the development requirements in the plan for the site?
Yes.
But they're not set out in here, are they? The modifications to the,
No, so, yeah, it will be modification to policy criterion.
sorry, could you,
Sorry, it will be modifications to the policy criterion as a result of this statement of common ground.
but they've not been drafted yet? No, okay, fine,
No,
that's what I
no.
was trying to check. Okay, we can talk about those in detail, but in terms of the remaining outstanding issue, seems to be, and I only had time to quickly skim through this, about the it's the indicative capacity, isn't it? And the rationale for that.
Yeah.
So the council position is that 34 is appropriate still.
Yeah, now it's kind of slightly increased to 36 dwellings.
36.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas your position is it's got capacity for more than that.
Yes, so that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, sorry, 36 now. And your figure would be?
Approximately 47 dwellings.
Going back to what I was asking about earlier, does it actually matter in the sense of if it said around 36 and a scheme were to come in and it achieved all of the things that the policy said, would the difference of 11 actually matter that much?
I think it will depend on the design of the site in the planning application stage, really.
It wouldn't be one way to say, well, it's 36.
Of the one before.
No,
It's not in that order at all. But to be clear, the council has done a lot of work looking at the developable area, applying the percentages, looking at the density, and this is the number that they've come up with.
You're standing by that, fine. And you certainly wouldn't want to change it to something higher because you'd be at risk then of saying, well, we're going to have to compromise on some elements of the policy.
Yeah.
Okay. But you wouldn't rule out 47 if you could be convinced by a scheme that's achieved all the things that you wanted.
I think that's right, but yes, as I say, a lot of work gone into where the buffers are and what is developable and what isn't developable.
Okay, right. Let's see what way plan you've got to say.
Thank you. We believe it does matter, just for the simple reason that in our experience, having tried to secure planning permission on a number of allocated sites in West Berkshire. Such a difference. It's extremely difficult to get the council to accept such a significant difference in numbers. One or two either way, here or there, yes, the council tend to accept that. But where it's a material change from the provisions of the policy, then it's very difficult to secure planning permission on that basis, even if the scheme justifies.
Okay, okay, interesting perspective on it. It does make me wonder whether these figures ought to be explained in some way, in some part of the plan. If they're not, I'll have a think about that. They're not on the face of it described as indicative. They are around, which I suppose is maybe intentional, given that the work that you say has been done to determine them. So maybe a good reason for it. Anyway, from your point of view, you think that reading through the statement of common ground or the statement of uncommon ground, there are reasons, methodological reasons, where you set out that the capacity is greater than that.
Yes.
Do you want to just? I mean, the council say it's thought about it carefully, it's applied an approach, and it's talked to you about it, and it still maintains that its developable area and its density assumptions are correct. So do you want to just point out what the main difference is?
Yes, of course. The main difference is that, in our view, the council should take the findings of the landscape sensitivity and capacity assessment in relation to the open space, the landscape buffer, and the setback, exclude those from the developable area, and the remaining area would be 2.35 hectares, which at an appropriate density of 20 dwellings per hectare would deliver approximately 47 houses. Having read the council's explanation of the way that they've approached the calculation, and having listened to what they've had to say this afternoon, what we don't understand, sir, is that having excluded the land identified by the landscape sensitivity and capacity assessment, the council has gone on to exclude more land by applying a developable area percentage of 75% taken from the density pattern book study, and applied this to the developable area. It's apparent, if I can refer to the density pattern book study, it's apparent from paragraphs 2.92 to 2.94 that in the absence of more detailed site-specific assessment, the purpose of applying a 75% developable area percentage to the gross site area is to take account of the fact that medium-sized sites on the edge of settlements typically feature open space beyond incidental open space, landscape buffers, and large road infrastructure. So if the council has already excluded the open space, landscape buffer, and setback required by the landscape sensitivity and capacity assessment, and there is no requirement for larger road infrastructure, what possible reason or justification can they be for applying the 75% developable area percentage, which is intended to take account of exactly the same things? In our view, that represents double counting, and that's why the figure is what it is.
Understood. So just to be clear about this red line, the plan doesn't include figures for how big it is, but in the submitted plan, the red line shape is the same as in the statement of common ground, is it?
We include, like, in the statement of common ground, there's a dotted line. So we propose to include.
Oh, okay, so it's slightly bigger.
Yeah, slightly bigger, yeah.
So how big is this red line site?
It's 4.3.
Okay, and within that, on the submitted plan, there's a green hatched area called open space, yeah?
Yeah.
So that reduces down what's left to what?
So public open space, in the similar common grounds is 1.2 hectare.
The open space is 1.2 hectares.
Yeah.
So that would leave 3.1.
Sorry, I think the whole site area is 4.0 hectare, sorry, 4.0 hectare. And the public open space is, open space is 1.2 hectare.
That leaves you 2.88 hectares.
Correct.
And then you discounted that by to
And
75%.
then from the capacity calculation, we also take out the two setback. One is the station road, station road setback, and then the setback from railway line.
Yeah.
So
It's like,
we use the site area of 2.4 hectare.
so he referred to 2.35. You've down to 2.4.
I think it's a rounding up.
Okay, so that's about the same.
Yeah.
But then you don't apply 20 to that 2.4.
Yeah, the council apply is 75%,
Then you apply the 75%. Okay.
and then the
so-
20 is the same. Density.
So the difference is applying the 75% to what you've netted down to, and whether that amounts to double counting. So what's happening to this other 25% of this developable area then?
So from the council's density book approach, the 75% account for possible need for access and surface infrastructure, landscape buffers necessary, and on-site open space and such provision necessary. So it's really a general approach and consistent approach we apply to across all the RSA sites. It's kind of like a gross and to net ratio we use.
Yes, but it is a bit odd, isn't it, if you've already taken out the open? I mean, are you looking, you've got, well, actually you moved it, haven't you, on this plan? But anyway, it doesn't matter really. You've got a big block of open space that the developers having to provide within the red line.
I think open space is a different case here because it have to like be in the plan to make the plan is acceptable in landscape terms. And this is evidence from our landscape assessment.
Yes. But it still is open. Would it not count if, insofar as you've got quantified requirements for open space, which we talk about, but they're in one of the DM policies, aren't they? It's the whatever hectares per 1,000 population. Wouldn't this block of patched area, whether it's that shape or this shape, wouldn't that count towards that?
Yeah.
But landscape sensitivity and capacity study, you recognise this area is within the AOMB on the edge of a settlement. So it felt as though we needed to conserve and enhance the site as well. And that is where the public open space comes from. That's it really. Is that so?
I'm none the wiser, I have to say. The question is, if this site plan, and presumably there's a wording in the policy as well, requires within this red line, this big block of 1.2 hectares out of the 4, although it doesn't look a bigger proportion of that to me, but anyway, leaving that aside, is to be provided as open space. But to get down to your further 75% discount, when you've also taken off the buffer areas along the railway and station road, but you're then looking for another you're taking another 25% off for on-site services, infrastructure, access, and open space. So are you saying that once this bit of 1.2 hectares of open space has been provided, and the buffers along the railway line and the station road has been provided, in addition to that, There's more open space that needs to be provided.
I guess it's really like general terms in the pattern book approach, and then this approach has been applied to actually all of the RSA sites.
Yeah, but some of them have hatched areas of open space
But
and some don't,
um,
which does suggest
I think for this particular site, the large area of open space was to make the development acceptable in landscape terms. So it was seen as a wider benefit to the village of Hermitage. And so actually, I think there's agreement on the developable area in essence, really, for the rest of the site. We did take out buffers for the setback along Station Road, and also for alongside the railway line as well. I think we've worked out that that would be another three dwellings to the site capacity if that was to be included. So we'd be looking at, say, 39.
if the if this hatched area is necessary in landscape visual terms, why is it moved from being along the north side of this site to kind of coming further south and reduced?
It was in response to work that the site promoter had done, and then the landscape architect looked at it, and it was found to be acceptable.
So that area of this site that happens to be outside the two adjoining allocations, RSA 20 and 21, we can look at what they say in a minute about their, is this open space, would it also extend into these other two, or would these other two, you said that these soil sites can be developed separately. It adjoins 20 and 21, this big block of open space. Would there be similar open space on those edges of those sites that would link to this, or would this just be separate?
No, so this would be separate. So this would only come forward if this particular site was developed.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Parameter D of the policy and the landscape sensitivity and character and capacity assessment both refer to the open space being provided in the form of a village green. There's a clear indication there that the council would wish that area of open space to be made public. Given that it is 1.2 hectares in size, that is significantly in excess of the policy DM40 standard. So the open space serves a dual role. It's for public, it's as public open space, but it also has a significant landscape role. But the fact remains is, I think both parties have always seen this area as being publicly accessible and usable, hence our point about double counting.
And would it be usable by the residents of RSA 20 and 21?
Yes.
Yeah, so there would be a link between.
Yes, there would.
It didn't seem to make any sense that you kind of.
Well, the indicative plan actually shows links, pedestrian footpath links between the sites, and those would link into the open spaces provided within those sites.
All a bit confusing, isn't it? There's three different allocations, the arrows going in different places. And anyway, I think I've had enough of this one. So we'll leave it there unless there's anything else anybody else wants to say. And I'll have a think about this. And I'll now give you a choice. I'll take guidance from the council. It's 3:25. We've got the other two sites here to do, and we've got another one, and then we've got the Pangbourne site. I suggest we have a break, unless when people particularly want to carry on. I suggest we have a break for 15 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and finish off. Yeah, you happy with that? Okay, thank you. So it is 3:25 now. I think we'll resume at 3:50 if we could, please. Thank you. dwindling, I see. Sorry, I just had one final question that I forgot to ask about RSA 22, and it was the modification about heritage. Which refers to the scheduled monument. Heritage impact assessment will be required due to the presence of non-designated heritage assets, which was originally in the policy, and then it went on to, and the nearby scheduled monument, Grimsbury Castle, fine, and that's how Historic England supportive of that, but they also refer to a listed building, grade 2 listed building, Barnaby Thatch. They say there's also potential to harm the setting of Barnaby Thatch, grade 2 listed building. So what if the heritage impact assessment clause is referring to one designated heritage asset, i.e. the scheduled monument, why isn't it referring to the listed building as well?
Can we check that and get back to you?
Yeah, I mean, the HIA should deal with it, but I mean, the fact that you refer to one listed building and non-designated heritage assets, it seems a little odd that if there's another one that could be potentially affected, which is what Historic England say, it doesn't refer to that, so I'll leave that. Okay. There may be some further clarification about this site and indeed its relationship with the other two, but let's just move on now to the RSA 20, which is at both of these two, 20 and 21 are retained allocations, aren't they? They both have permission. This one's got full permission. And it's controlled by a house builder.
Right.
But no completions are assumed by 2028. That's because of neutrality.
Yeah, the delay, yeah.
And that's because of the 2025 date for the wastewater treatment works to be improved. Is that right to start with?
I think the deliverability assessment, we took a cautious approach. Yeah, as you said, take into account like the upgrade of wastewater treatment work and then the mitigation measures to be operational.
Okay, and we know that this is the one where, as they explained earlier, upgrades in 2025 and then further upgrades to 2030. Okay, so anything, so this, let me just be clear about these three maps though, which is all. This one, RSA 20. Shows an access from a cul-de-sac to the north. That's the road access. So that's hence this can be developed completely separately to the other two. Yeah, from a road access point of view. Then it has footpath links from into both the adjoining allocations. Yeah.
Yeah.
With arrows, presumably could go in two, well, some of them go in two directions, some of them go in one direction, but irrespective of that. So, so the one would go into the RSA 21. There's an arrow showing footpath link from this site, and there's an arrow going from RSA 22 to RSA 20. Yeah. So
yes,
before this large area, largish area, 1.2 hectares of open space that's going to be provided adjoining this site, the link would go into that presumably. But well, I mean, the position of the arrow is from that area.
yes.
Okay. So you're not, and it was referred to earlier that this would be public open space. This, what's described on this RSA 22 as open space, the village green type concept.
Yeah.
And it would be available for people from each of these three allocations.
I think, yeah, from what the site promoter has suggested.
Sorry?
I think it's from what the site promoter has suggested in the hearing section.
Okay. Right, okay, so I've got nothing else about RSA 20. Unless anyone else has, no. And RSA 21. This has got outline permission. I think the capacity is stated to be
21.
10.
Oh, yeah, capacity is 10, and then
But it's got permission for 21.
21 dwellings because the site include an area within settlement boundary, so it's a larger site boundary in the outline permission.
So this was the adjoining land presumably to the west, is it? Northwest, west? That's made this site bigger, the permission relates to?
North, the north.
In the north, in the settlement boundary, which is the area in the settlement boundary.
Yeah. So it's a kind of northern part of the site.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so the capacity of the allocation based on the red line is 10,
Yeah.
but in your maths for the overall supply in taking account of the adjoining land is 21. Okay,
21 is what permitted.
sorry?
21 is what permitted in
Yeah.
outline
Okay.
permission.
Does the red line need to be altered and the capacity altered to reflect that, or?
Our approach, because there's a principle unacceptable of the development within settlement boundary. So we think it's no need to extend the site's boundary.
But the settlement boundary as amended, as in this plan, settlement boundary includes this red line allocation, doesn't it? And all of them. Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The figures will add up one way or another, won't they? Whether it's in or not. Right. Anything? And the same issues about the nutrient neutrality. Any other points anybody wishes to make about this site? No. Yeah.
So I'll just come back on the query that you had about Barnaby Thatch. So that was in relation to RSA 21.
Yes.
And then RSA 22, that was Grimsby Castle.
Oh, Historic England's points.
Yes.
When it referred to the listed building.
Yeah, so the list, so protect the setting of the nearby listed building, that was for RSA 21, so that was the old farmhouse. And then the scheduled monument, Grimsby Castle, was RSA 22.
Right, okay. I think Historic England also referred to the listed building in relation to 22, because they went on to say, are mindful also of the intervening development proposed for allocation RSA 21. So they were saying, even taking that account of, they were saying there could potentially be an issue, but we'll leave it for now. Okay. But either way, it should be caused by the impact, the heritage impact assessment anyway. So the final non-strategic allocation in the AONB is the Haven at Kintbury, 20 dwellings, a new allocation. And this is sovereign, isn't it? Who suggest it has capacity for 35 rather than the 20. It's in multiple ownership, but with an agreement, option agreements with sovereign. Council, it doesn't make any, it's no development assumed in the 5-year supply up to 2028, but 20 over the planned period. Right, so what's the capacity issue here then? Let's start with sovereign, shall we?
Thank you, sir. Daniel Greswell from Boyer Planning, of course, here on behalf of Sovereign. I think our case is that we agree with 99% of the council's case, the small matter of the final number on the end. So if I can take us a step back to policy SP1 very quickly, and I appreciate we're on RSA 23, but just for context, I think that this policy quite helpfully sets a baseline expectation for developments on the edge of defined settlement boundaries of around 30 DPH, and then quite reasonably sets a number of potential exemptions from that, where you might divert from the 30 to a lower density. typical reasons, prevailing character of the area, et cetera, et cetera. Our case is that given the specific context of the site, there doesn't appear to be sufficient justification to divert from that sort of baseline expectation of 30 dwellings per hectare and bring the site down to 20 dwellings per hectare, which the council has done so. So I think that's the sort of principal point of contention there. There is a flexibility in policy SP1, which isn't then sort of taken forward in RSA 23 necessarily. There seems to be a kind of predetermination that it will be a lower density scheme, but I'm not sure of the kind of specific reasoning for that, and we don't feel that there's compelling reason to bring it down to 20 dph rather than sort of approximately 30 or so might be more appropriate. I think another point to make is, given the context of my client's Sovereign is a housing association, there's an aspiration on this site to bring forward an above policy compliant level of affordable housing, which also then has implications for the density, which might lean toward a higher density scheme rather than lower density scheme on the same sort of development footprint. Their preference by the council being more kind of 1, 2, 3 beds, not necessarily big 3, 4 bed family homes, which you might otherwise expect on a similar site. So those kind of the combination of those factors, we believe actually it would be more appropriate to kind of retain that baseline assumption of around 30 dph through policy RSA 23, rather than at this stage of the local plan making process, bring that down to 20 and actually have those discussions as part of the planning application process instead, if we do need to divert from that sort of approximately 30 dph figure. Hopefully that all makes sense.
Yeah, understood. So this site presumably is a hectare, is it?
Well, it's 1.4
1.4
so hectares, but on the basis of the council's 75%, it brings it down to sort of 1.05 hectares. So for the purposes of discussion today, let's assume the developable area is around 1 hectare. So if we go with 30 dph, it's 30, for example.
So if we look at from what you're saying, the policy SP1 says for this sort of location, I assume it's this sort of location, edge of defined settlements, net density of 30, and lower density in certain areas, particularly sensitive to intensification. This may be because of prevailing character of the area. So that may be typically the density of the existing houses nearby, which, if I look at this plan, look, higher density than, yeah. So it's not a particularly low density layout of existing dwellings. Sensitive nature of the surrounding countryside or built form, maybe the countryside, I don't know what the landscape capacity assessment said, and the relative remoteness of public transport. Well, I wouldn't have thought that you'd be wanting to do anything other than make efficient use of land of this allocation. So understood, yeah, okay. So you don't think that, well, as you said, you don't think going down to 20 is required by anything in SP1 in this particular instance?
Not necessarily at this stage. I think that will be borne out of the kind of planning application process further down the line. I appreciate, I don't want to put any words in the council's mouth here, and I'm sure they'll respond shortly, but of course the site is within the national landscape, but the relationship of the site, it has a better relationship with the settlement than it does necessarily with the wider kind of national landscape AONB area. It is separated from that wider landscape by well, a lot of tall trees, effectively. So in terms of character, our submission is that there's no reason really to specifically bring it down to 20 at this stage, rather than the 30. I think a more robust approach would be to assume that baseline position of 30 and then sort of work it out based on the technical assessments kind of as we progress sort of further along toward an application.
Okay. Right, let's get the council's assessment? Why have you, what's the specific reason in this case in terms of what SP1 says that you need to assume 20 rather than 30?
So in paragraph 8.2, we said clearly, like the starting point is we calculate the approximate number of dwellings using the West Berkshire density pattern book approach. And then in the pattern book approach, that's again, it's a consistent approach. If that's non-A1B actual settlement, we use 30 dwellings per hectare. But within A1B, we use 20 dwellings per hectare. Again, it's really an approach we use based on pattern book.
What is it in the pattern book that says 20 in this particular instance as opposed
In
to 30?
A1B.
Sorry?
In A1B.
A1B generally?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, so that's the starting point. So is SP1 consistent with that? Because that's... It doesn't have a different policy in SP1, does it? Maybe it's in SP2. It's a lot of policy words in this plan.
It says in SP1 in that, I think you've already covered it, but in the paragraph on density.
The reason justification?
No, within the policy
Yeah.
itself,
Yeah.
about halfway down the policy box in the first page, it says density on individual sites will vary according to their location, context, size of development, or site-specific issues. And then we've got there in the third bullet point, lower density developments will be appropriate in certain areas of the district that are particularly sensitive. And talks about the surrounding countryside,
Yeah.
which would cover the national landscape.
It would, but I mean, if it seems if that's the council's position, it would seem to be clear as be explicit that it's talking about 30 and then it's some sort of departures from it. But if one of the departures from it is everywhere in the A and B, we're starting from 20, it would seem to be a bit clearer to say that in SP1. If that's what the density pattern book does,
Yeah.
I guess it would be clearer. I mean, it may not do what you want, but it would bring a more consistency between SP1, which you pointed out, and this approach, and indeed elsewhere in the AMB. So maybe that's
Something that could be clarified.
yeah, clarified in SP1. If that is the starting point, it's 30 on the edge of settlement locations generally, but actually in 3/4 of the district it isn't. It's 20, which seems quite a significant difference, really. Okay. And in terms of what that then means for negotiating, thank you for pointing out 8.2 anyway, because I was struggling a bit earlier to try and remember where it was, what the approach to densities was set out, and yeah, okay, yeah, right. Sovereign, do you have anything further to say?
Well, not really. I suppose I think the main kind of point that I was trying to get across is, yes, I appreciate now that there might be consistency in approach, but given the site-specific context, we do feel something around a kind of approximately 30 DPH would be much more robust and appropriate, and a more effective use of the land. To borrow the wording of national policy. So in particular, because of the aspiration of the client in terms of the level of affordable housing provision as well, that there are kind of site-specific and context specific reasons to depart from that 20 figure. And my concern, sorry, is that the figure of 20, I appreciate we've had conversations today about, what is approximately 20, what I think is approximately 20 might be different to what a planning committee might think is approximately 20. I just don't want to lead to kind of protracted conversations about, what that figure might be further down the line, as it were.
I suppose from a plans point of view, it isn't written with any particular developer in mind, though. I know you are now got options on the site, and the housing association may be able to justify, well, you know, when it comes up with its scheme, it may be that the house types are smaller and there is a good reason why you do want to maximise numbers for good reasons, providing affordable housing. But wouldn't that be better dealt with as part of a application stage rather than preempting that, because, you know, Sovereign may not end up buying the site and someone else may, and they won't want to put 5-bedroom houses on and cram those in to get 30, I suppose, in one scenario. But understand the point anyway. So thank you, and I'll have a think about that, and indeed what these approximate numbers are, and the extent to which they're. I mean, they're certainly not maximums and they're not minimums. They are approximates, and it's how indicative, I suppose, they are in terms of what they're based on. I think you've explained that you wanted to be consistent, fine, because that gives you a benchline. I suppose that consistency does then potentially lead to difficulty at the application stage. If, you know, site characteristics are very different, but the starting point is, well, we're going to be stuck to something quite close to that figure that we've put in the plan. But I can have a think about that. Okay, anything else? Anybody else wishes to say about any of the allocations that are in the plan in this part of the district? No. So that brings us to the end of all the housing allocations, non-strategic, under matter 6. So the only other 2 items on the agenda are the other sites that were considered through the HELA and SA process, and the action points relating to those. So we've got PAN north of Pangbourne Hill, which the HELA assessed as being not suitable due to impacts on highways and on character and appearance. That was on settlement form and due to the topography and the AONB landscape. So a smaller area is now considered suitable, and this is restricted to the eastern part of this HELA site adjoining the existing houses, and that's shown on the map that you included in the response to AP 14, and that is below a certain contour line. Yep, that's
Correct.
the boundary.
Yes.
And that has capacity for 25 based on what we've been talking about in terms of the approach taken, and on the basis of, well, possibly that lower figure and or whatever evidence, the highways objection has gone away. Okay. So in terms of how you reassess that smaller area, and this is going back to, I suppose, what Carter Jonas was saying about when you've chosen to look at a smaller area, because Nexus plan, obviously, that shows a larger, that was the HELA site that was assessed, a larger area.
That's right, yes.
But how did you come up with this sub area within it at this stage? Was it something you previously identified, or this was just done at this stage?
Was based on the updated landscape work, which was done, I think, in 2021, but the HELA omitted to reference that, and it instead referred to the 2011 landscape work.
So a smaller part of the HELA site, you had subdivided the HELA site.
Right, yes.
Okay, but you'd overlooked that, and you'd gone back and referred to an earlier landscape assessment.
Yeah, that's
okay.
correct.
So had you not done that at the point, you would have identified this site as being suitable. Okay, right. So on that basis, you think that there is an area there that's suitable for 25. Right. Unless there's anything else the council want to say, let's open it up to Nexus. Have you got anything you wish to say?
Sorry, sir. Yes. Thank you, sir. Yes, two main areas really, just to focus on, if it's okay, just to break down my points. So firstly, just to thank the council for its amended position as a starter, but just pausing there with what the council is now proposing or putting forward in IN 14. I assume we're in agreement just at that level that the council would ask you to make a modification to the plan to allocate the site, irrespective not linked to any conclusion you may or may not make about housing numbers in the short or long term in the plan, but to actually make the currently submitted plan sound and accord with its own strategy. Because you may recall, sir, and people on the table may also, in the Matter 3 session where I attended as well, you put the question prompted in part by me about the fact that Pangbourne had 0 as an allocation relative to other places, despite its inherent sustainability. And the council's response to you was that you asked them, sir, why has Pangbourne got nothing? And the response was, well, we would have allocated at Pangbourne, but there were no suitable sites. And that was the position at the time, according to the council. Council now accepts that there is a suitable site. So logically, to me, the only outcome of that can be the council requesting a modification to its plan to allocate the site, notwithstanding anything else, because it's inherently more sustainable than a number of the other sites we've been talking about this afternoon, for example, because it's much higher in the settlement hierarchy than a number of them. So I want to come back separately to capacity, but that was my first point.
Understood. Okay. Yes, understood.
I mean, is that something, so I could report back to my client, is that something that shouldn't really be in dispute with the council either? I wouldn't have thought, because I can't see any other route that its evidence now takes it to, unless it's saying, notwithstanding its own strategy, it's going to say it's suitable but not suitable for allocation or not needed somehow.
The way you put the question, I can understand the logic. I suppose another question would be, well, is the plan sound without this allocation, irrespective of what the council said about what it would have done had it known what it knows now?
There's quite a fundamental point on that, sir, which is why I'm keen to flush this out, because if the council is going to suggest to you the plan is sound, notwithstanding its conclusions now, and in the absence of an allocation of Pangbourne, then I have a fundamental issue about almost every other allocation in the AOMB, because they are, in accordance with the council's own settlement hierarchy, less sustainable.
Not on landscape grounds or suitability grounds, but purely on settlement hierarchy.
Yeah, if you follow policies SP1 and SP3 of the council's own plan and its own evidence in the updated HELAR now, and the settlement hierarchy it identifies and the matrix it produced itself, you can see where Pangbourne sits. And the council told you it would have allocated at Pangbourne, notwithstanding anything else it would have done, had there been a suitable site. And I questioned and said there is one, and the council is now accepting that there is.
I suppose putting it in NPPF terms and soundness tests, you would say it's untenable for the council to argue that an appropriate strategy is to allocate those other sites when you've got a strategic policy setting out a hierarchy, and you've got a site that is suitable, that is better related to that hierarchy.
That's right. So I don't think it's a sustainable strategy, or one that's internally coherent to have a strategy that doesn't allocate at one of the most sustainable places in accordance with the council's own evidence, but allocates at demonstrably less sustainable places. So I'm not arguing for the deletion of other sites. I'm just suggesting a strategy that does not include this one can't be sound or coherent.
Okay, well, let's move on to what you say about capacity, because obviously the site that you promoted, and I've got a plan here, I can't remember, I must have got it from your written statement or your Reg 19 rep, I don't know which. But anyway, it includes land going further west from the slither that has now been suggested as being developable for 25. And within it, you've done a sort of a high level layout which has got a developable area, which obviously would go higher up the slope than the 70-metre line that the council's referred to, and based on its landscape evidence. So, I mean, you may as well finish off what you wish to say in terms of what you think the red line could be, having regard to what you see as relevant landscape evidence and highways capacity, etc.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I mean, just for my understanding, and the council correct me if I'm wrong on here, the reference to 25 homes, which comes up in their document IN 14, set out in the table. I think you then cross-refer to map 2 of that submission, which shows the rectangular area. And I think the read across from that, looking back at the text, is that the council's document Land 6A, which is the landscape sensitivity and capacity assessment, identifies an area of land of a similar shape and location. I think that's that.
The map that's included in IN 11, that's based on the landscape sensitivity assessment recommendations.
Great, thank you. So that's where it comes from, and I'm conscious, sir, that obviously this isn't a Section 78 inquiry. You're not going to want to hear me saying what my landscape evidence says versus what the council said. But I think there are a few strategic points that are relevant here, because the difference between us effectively is that we think the scheme we've put forward it accommodates approximately 40 homes. So the level of difference here is between approximately 25 from the council and 40 from us.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Does that mean the red line would be in a different place?
Yes.
And would it be the plan that I referred to there, which has got the sort of blue developable area in the centre surrounded by sort of landscaped areas?
So which plan, sir, are you?
I don't know where I got it from.
Could you, I think if you're able to wave it vaguely, sorry, and I can, I've got a few different, yes, I recognise that. In broad terms, yes, we're talking about the same area. So I've got slightly more detailed plans from my area.
No, okay.
With things that have been submitted before, but yes, that's the area we're talking about.
So the red line would be significantly different to what the council is saying?
It would be materially different. Not, I would say it's not significant, but it's materially different. Yeah, it would take in principle, sir, the difference I'm coming to is that the council's approach proposes that it follows a 70-metre contour. Yeah. Our scheme follows a 75-metre contour. And if I can just explain why, and I'll put it to you just at a high level, that ours is a more credible proposition. The first one is that, notwithstanding the sort of genesis of this rectangular area, obviously a development that follows a contour by definition isn't going to be a rectangle. So I think we can only, as a starting point, take that rectangle as some sort of indicative point, because that isn't where the contour sits exactly. So I think the council's taken it literally and applied it and come up with 25 units. So I just apply kind of a caution on that anyway, because I think it must be indicative. But the second point is that we don't agree with the 70-metre contour, and there's, without getting into detail, there's a few just strategic reasons why. The first one, so, is that the development in Pangbourne, I'm using for the purposes of this, so map 2 from the council's IN14 submission, just for ease of reference. But you'll see development in Pangbourne extends west up Pangbourne Hill quite a long way past this site, and the westernmost area, effectively, that goes up to the 90-metre contour. That's the area on the sort of southern side of Pangbourne Road. So there's no sort of reality that development doesn't extend up the hill well above 70 and well above 75, because it does. Secondly, so the council accepts and agrees with us and Land 6, that landscape sensitivity document, confirms this, that the site we're talking about, not the small little rectangle, but the site we put forward, isn't visible from public vantage points. We agree with that. It isn't. And probably the most recently relevant point, I think, is that you'll see on that map, sir, there's a development immediately to the south, both of that red triangle and south of the slightly larger area that we're talking about. That's a site that was allocated in the allocations document and is now built out. And that development follows the 75-metre contour. And that was a provision which is specifically referenced in the allocations document. It's a criteria of the policy that allocated that site. And it was obviously found sound. It's the council's allocations document, and an inspector found it to be sound. Now, we wholly agree with that. That scheme followed that logic. And the scheme we're advancing follows the exact same logic, follows the 75-metre contour. So it's a principle that's already established in this exact location. So we're unclear where the justification for 70 comes from. I see the number, the reference in that Land 6A document, but it's not explained why there's been some change that means development can no longer go above 70, where the council in its own plan, the last one, the allocations document, allocated up to the 75, and our landscape evidence supports that approach. So we do agree with the principle that development should sit on the lower slopes. We do agree with that. We just don't think the 70-metre reference has any actual evidential basis. And on the ground, it's very clear that development has done the opposite to that. It's gone up to the 75 successfully, and that's what we would replicate.
Okay, just to be clear about the site that you said that was allocated in the allocations document.
Yes.
That went up to 75. You said that was on adjoining land to the
south. It's Sheffield Close. I don't know if you can, on that plan at map 2, sir.
Yeah.
You will see a reference to Sheffield Close.
Yeah.
And there's a development in there which was made an allocation in the allocations document that is now completed.
So
that
right.
follows the 71. You'll see in the allocation policy there was actually a specific criterion that guided that development, and it referred to 75 as being appropriate. And we would agree and think that's probably the right approach this time round also. And if the site was to be allocated, that may well be the exact same criteria or criterion that should follow through to guide it in this instance as well.
And in terms of the red line that you would suggest, with a figure, associated figure of 40, did you say?
Yes, that's right. So
Where would the red line?
it broadly goes, could you get, shall I use map 2? It is in some of our submissions, but just for ease of reference, because it's in front of me. In broad terms, the red line would wrap around. Well, actually, sorry, sir, let me rewind slightly. You can see on that map 2, there's a dashed blue line the council's showing called total site area. Now, it's not quite that big, the red line we're talking about, but it would broadly, the only real difference is on that northern edge. It wouldn't go as far as that. It would only go up to and include that strategic landscaping finger that you can see sticking in from the western boundary. So it would go up to and include that strategic landscaping buffer, which sets an obvious and natural boundary both on that western side and on the northern side.
Irrespective of where you drew the red line, the figure, it were 14, you say that's the capacity that could fit below that 75-metre line. The development requirements could deal with, the broad layout of the development and where the houses should be in landscaping buffers or whatever, the same way as other policies.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Right, thank you. I presume nobody else has got anything to say, so I'll get the council to comment on this, shall we? In terms of, well, what you've heard there, let's deal with the detail of the landscape evidence and the layout and the 75 metres, the 70 metres, and then go back to the broader sort of strategic point about the council's response to the now finding some land here being suitable.
Obviously, there's quite a few points to cover here. Again, it all comes back to we're in the AONB, conserve and enhance, as per your MPPF. We look at these sites, how can we conserve and enhance this landscape? So it was felt that developing up to 75 just did not conserve and enhance a special quality of this landscape, the elevated plateau.
In terms of the specific points then about, well, the previous assessment when the development that's now being completed was allowed, that assessment allowed for up to 75 metres and that development's been built. So presumably you could look at that.
There is actually a photograph I'm looking at now within the landscape sensitivity and capacity study, which shows that the houses at Sheffield Close on the edge, up to the 75-metre contour, and they are quite prominent. So it was agreed that they should be kept lower than the adjacent site.
So in retrospect, you could have said, well, that was an error made at the time. Now it's been built, you can assess, the impact on adjoining land, or irrespective of that. When you now, you can see in real terms the impact of development at that.
So continuing it at 75 would be just too much for the AONB. It wouldn't conserve and enhance. It's elevated plateau. And Pangbourne is a settlement on 2 rivers. Majority of the developments, it was well below. It is compact, but it's just slightly up the valley side. It's not on the elevated plateau, which above 70 metres was.
And in terms of visibility, I know landscape assessments look at both the sort of landscape impact and the visual impact. I think the point was made that the visual impact would be limited because your assessment shows that there weren't any public vantage points that you'd see it from, or do you not agree with that?
I don't think I agree with that. I'm not quite sure what Nexus planning referring to. There will be, we got the Chilterns AONB across the way to the east. So there will be views across. But again, ask the question, sites which are only visible, are those the ones which we should protect?
Well, sorry, do you want to point?
Just assist, because I don't want you thinking I was making anything up or putting words into.
I'm sure you weren't.
No, just for the inspector's note, really. So land 6A, unfortunately, the document isn't page numbered, which makes it rather hard to point you to, but there's a crikey. There's a section, it's called West Berkshire Landscape Sensitivity and Capacity Assessment 2020 record sheet. It then goes through a couple of pages of things. So it goes through 3 pages of things, and then it finishes on a 4th page. And there is a sentence under additional comments where it says, although the site is not visible from public viewpoints, is how it starts. It does continue, because as I say, we differ on our conclusions. So it gets to go on to talk about 70 metres after that, which is obviously the conclusions it came to. But that was where I came to. I mean, it states it as a point of fact. Our landscape evidence agrees that it's not visible, in part due to the strategic landscaping, which is on the western and northern boundaries. So I think it is a statement of fact. There's then a difference of view as to this 70 metre contour, which has come out of, well, this one piece of work is the first time that this has come up.
When you refer to the strategic landscaping on the western boundary, and this is indicated on the OS plans, these green areas, these are trees.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not strategic landscaping to be provided. It's mature trees that are there.
Yes, exactly. Yes, sorry, so I should have been clear. Yeah, those are there. There are photos in the council's work, but that's it's grown another 4 years worth since that was done. So it's well over head height and substantially above that actually.
Okay, do you want to any of this public vantage point?
I looked through ever submitted LVIA as part of their regulations 19, and actually concludes that from one of their viewpoints, viewpoint number 4, there are views across to the site.
Okay, well, I can look at land. That's in land 6, viewpoint 4.
I think it's 4.14 in their visual impact assessment.
So just to be clear, can we just be clear what document you're talking about? Because the council's reverted from an older document which had different conclusions, some of which we agreed with, to what it's now claiming is it relies on a 2020 document. Some of the conclusions I don't agree with, but I think we need to be careful about picking and choosing some of the points. We were using the 2020 document as the council's evidence, or an earlier document as a 2011 document, I think, where the earlier landscape evidence from the council dated back to about then.
So I'm talking about your LVIA, your submitted one.
Right. Well, but we're testing your evidence. I mean, I'm happy to have a discussion about our evidence, but I suspect the inspector probably doesn't really want that debate. Happy to, but if it's the 20, all I was trying to do is make a point that the council's own evidence states exactly what ours says, and it does say there are no public viewpoints, and we agree. Doesn't mean you agree with us, obviously, on the 70 metres, because you don't.
Right, and just to be clear, we're talking about the land 6A.
That was what I understood.
Yeah,
So,
which is,
well, in fact, that is what the council refers to, because that's what its IN 14 document refers you to and me to. So that's what I've
right.
used.
Okay. Well, leave that with me. I can look at that. So in terms of the landscape impact, there's a difference of opinion about this, and there's some dissonance about the extent to what's visible and what isn't visible. But I can understand what the council has explained about the Sheffield Close development, and I can form a view about whether that can be seen from and the photographs of that. And
Yes, sir. And could I just as a final point for me, the relevance to this, because at one sense you might be thinking, well, does it make that much difference between 40 units and 25 and 70 metres and 75 metres and all the rest of it? And on one hand, you could argue maybe no, it doesn't. But I think the context of this is important. It goes back to my earlier point, really, which is that Pangbourne is so substantially more sustainable in the council's own evidence than many of the other locations that it would clearly be wrong to unduly restrict housing at one of the most sustainable locations, unless it was wholly justified. And that's where we're coming from, that when you look back, the 75 metre line is the line that the council has taken, an inspector took, the scheme's gone in, and today's the first I've heard of the council suggesting that it now somehow regrets a previous allocation and thinks it got it wrong. I haven't seen anything in the evidence to suggest that. That was the first time I've heard that. It looks pretty good to me on site, so I don't know if you've seen it, but anyway, we'll leave it there. But I think that is the context, and it is important in my mind in terms of the soundness of the strategy in the AONB area as a whole as to how Pangbourne is treated.
okay, in terms of highways, the council's reassessment on the basis of 25 said that there wasn't any concern about highways in terms of a severe impact, whether that would still apply if the figure were 40. I know you've provided some detailed assessments comparing situation in 2015 traffic amounts and now and the levels then. But
Yes, sir. I mean,
rather than go into that, let's just see what the council say in terms of 25 being acceptable from a highways point of view. Would 40 also be?
So with the previous housing development that this proposal accessed through, I would argue that it barely got through. And the concern is the junction at the bottom of the hill, Pangbourne Hill A329 junction. It's a difficult junction. It's constrained due to the presence of the buildings around the junction there. And on balance, we allowed the 35 dwellings that has recently been completed. With this proposal that's before us, from a highways point of view, the smaller that we can get it, the better. Whether there's a difference between 25 and 40 dwellings, I suppose would be for a transport statement to argue with detailed traffic modelling of the junction at the bottom of the hill. But I think we would remain really quite concerned about it. And from the original planning application for 35 dwellings, there was certainly considerable local concern about it, which we had to address as local highway authority. So we would argue the smaller the better.
Okay. Have you looked at the evidence that Nexus has provided in terms of the traffic surveys, more recent in comparison with 2015 and the amount of traffic using the junction, etc.? Or is that something that you've not looked at in detail?
I've not looked at in detail at this stage, but can do so if required to do so.
could I just, sorry to interrupt, sir, but just if this helps, just to refresh Mr. Goddard's memory, the document we submitted as part of our evidence is a response from Mr. Goddard to us as part of a pre-application submission we made to try to resolve this issue, and it addresses 40 units. And there's no objection. So there isn't a refreshing of the memory that's needed here. So it's been done. And Mr. Goddard's already taken a view on this, and it's in front of you. So it's quite clear, whilst the council refers to 25 units in the IN 14 document, the highways, the removal of a highways objection doesn't just relate to 25 units, it relates to 40. And that's Mr. Goddard's submission that we've got in front of you.
Okay, yeah, so, right, okay, understood.
That's fine, but we maintain the view that the smaller the better.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, from the issues that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Understand the points of view. Right, I don't think we can go a lot further on this, but do you want to respond to the strategic point about, you know, what is the council, do you agree that to make the plan sound, given what you've said previously and the strategy, you would have to now allocate the site that you deem to be suitable in this location?
So it's quite a big question. Can we just have 10 minutes and come back to you?
Yes.
Because whilst we've been talking, I've been looking at the policy, I've been looking at the supporting text, and I just do want to take instructions before we give a firm answer on that.
Okay. I'm just thinking whether we need to come back or we think about it and deal with it at another time. Are you back at another time?
I'm not due to be back, sir. I thought we'd be concluded today, but if there's a problem, I can try my best. I don't know.
Okay, no,
what we'd
let's,
be
okay,
looking at, but
let's have an adjournment for 10 minutes. This is the last issue we're dealing with today. I don't know what time it is. We had a clock here last time I was in. It's gone again now. Someone's... Oh, it's there. It's hidden away. Okay. Oh, it's a different clock. It's a round clock now. Right. Anyway, yes, let's come back at, well, let's say 1:45. I think, I mean, this is particular to this site, but there are 5 other sites that the council has now said are suitable and potentially available or are available. So let's not, and they all may relate to different bits of the hierarchy and have different, so it may be that you may be able to say something about this in response to the, interesting point made, but there are also potential implications obviously for other suitable sites. So I think we need to bear that in mind as well before come to any definite conclusions. I mean, anyway, whatever the council proposes, ultimately I'm going to make a judgment about the soundness of the plan and what, if anything, needs to be done to modify it. So, okay, thank you for that. So let's come back in, well, should we say 1:45, and we'll just deal with it then. Thank you. raised by Nexus Planning, and it's, you know, it isn't necessarily an easy issue for the council to respond to immediately. I appreciate that, and therefore, you know, I'll give you the opportunity to respond now, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a definitive response. And obviously, it isn't just about this site, because as I said, I think there are 5, aren't there, sites that have been reassessed and found to be suitable and or available. So, you know, what do you want to say now, and then what further action maybe we need from the council's point of view?
So if the council had had the information that it now has pre-submission of the plan, then in strict accordance with the settlement hierarchy, it's likely that site would have been an allocation. That's information that's come post submission of the plan, of course. In relation to the other sites, at the moment, that answer isn't an answer to be applied in a blanket way across all those sites. If you, sir, want to ask that same question, which, as an aside, I'm not sure is a necessary question anyway at the moment, in terms of soundness. But if that question is to be asked in relation to the other sites, the council would need some time in order to go back over those sites, look at the information and come back with a definitive answer.
Just to make sure I understand, though, the argument is partly related to the fact that Pangbourne is a rural service centre. Yeah, that's part of why you say
yes,
and the fact that there aren't other new allocations at Pangbourne in the plan.
Yes,
that's the context for
that's the context.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and that context, well, in terms of the settlement hierarchy, I think that the 3 CA sites were part of the Newbury Thatcham area, and they relate to Thatcham. So the settlement hierarchy and the Till 13 site obviously relates to Tilehurst and an urban area. So again, they are related to elements of the spatial strategy, the hierarchy that are, well, if it's a hierarchy, above rural service centres, but situations may be different in terms of site specifics, in terms of other opportunities, etc., etc. So
exactly,
it's a nuanced.
Yes, it's not
approach.
Black and white.
No, okay,
Yes.
that's fine. No, it's helpful that you've given an initial response and understand that. I think since Town are here, I mean, do you want to say anything at this stage in terms of, we may as well get any initial thoughts out there, and I'll come back to Nexus as well.
I mean, I didn't make the point earlier on about settlement hierarchy, because I think we have and spatial strategy, because we discussed that previously, but obviously we would contend that there are other parts of the borough, including the eastern area, that are more inherently more sustainable. I think I probably don't have much more to comment at the current stage. I mean, you won't be surprised to know that we think that there is a need for more sites to be allocated, and that is particularly in the early years of the plan, and that is a point that I'm sure we'll come back to tomorrow. And after that, you may decide that you want to ask the council that very question.
Okay. But in terms of Tilehurst in the eastern, I mean, the plan has been modified to reflect the eastern urban area being a focus for housing development and whatever. So yeah, okay, understood. Yeah. So Nexus, do you want to?
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you for the council's clarification in such a timely way. Thank you very much for that. But just perhaps to support the point as well, and I won't stray into areas that don't really involve me, but just to perhaps provide the council and you with some comfort as to this. I think obviously the council's got a strategy which splits the district into separate spatial areas. It's taken the view, rightly we say, and as do numerous others, that the AONB area, because, well, for numerous reasons, and it set this out to you, so why there should be some development in that area. It's done that, and in that AONB area, consistent with that strategy, there is only one site the council is identifying where it is saying, based on evidence it has now, it would take a different view. The table includes others, but they're not in the AONB area, so they wouldn't contribute to that AOMB area strategy, no matter what view was taken on. They're part of a different part. So I think you can compartmentalize the strategy in the AOMB area and what's appropriate there. You've obviously got wider questions as well, but that may stop a kind of house of cards kind of approach. But I'll stop there because I'm straying beyond my remit, if I'm honest.
Which is, I think, is what the council's response. It's saying that in looking at that one in that context and that part of the spatial strategy. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you. Unless there's anything else today, we'll leave that there. So thank you all. It's despite we had a long break at lunchtime, didn't we? And we've had a full afternoon, so swings and roundabouts, I suppose. So tomorrow we're back for matter 7, aren't we? And then the start of matter 8. And sorry, just to be clear, the matter 8 we've chosen some topics. This is the requirements of housing developers, isn't it? I'm just doing this from memory. And I think there are 4 issues that I think the council said it would particularly wish to discuss when there's Lambert's available, and that's why they're on the agenda for tomorrow. Yeah.
Yes, I can't be here the day after
And you won't be
tomorrow.
here on Thursday.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, and in terms of the can't remember if I would change the agenda again. I think I decided to put the DM4 on first to make sure if there's one policy. I mean, I am confident we'll get through all those 4, but I'd put that one at the top on the basis that it's complicated and it'll be a good one to start with to spend time on before leaving it towards the end of the day.
Yes, and there's an external consultant coming for that policy as well.
Okay, fine. Okay, well, thank you all for contributions today, and we'll be back tomorrow morning, or at least some of us will be here at 9:30.